Hello, incurable romantics. Prepare to travel back in time to an era of whispered secrets and forbidden passions. The November wind bit at Evelyn Reed's ankles, a merciless hound chasing her through the grimy streets of Chicago. It howled a mournful tune that echoed the hollowness in her stomach and the even deeper emptiness of her worn-out purse. In her hand, clutched so tightly the paper crinkled in protest, was an eviction notice. The words, stark and black against the cheap pulp, had become a death sentence for the life she knew, a final, definitive period at the end of a long, sorrowful chapter. Her respectable, scholarly past, filled with the scent of old books and the gentle murmur of poetry, seemed like a dream belonging to another woman in another lifetime. That woman had not known the gnawing ache of true hunger or the chilling dread of a landlord's shadow falling across her door. Her room at the boarding house was a cage of faded floral wallpaper and perpetual gloom. It offered little warmth, but was the last bastion against the unforgiving city. Now even that was being torn away. Desperation was a physical thing, a cold weight in her chest that made each breath a struggle. It was this desperation that had led her to the classifieds section of the Chicago Tribune, her eyes scanning past advertisements for secretaries and shop girls, positions for which she was either overqualified by education or underqualified by the harsh reality of her threadbare coat. Then she saw it, tucked away at the bottom of a column, a small, discreet box of text that seemed to pulse with a strange gravity. It was utterly devoid of the usual details. No company name, no list of duties. It simply read, "Seeking a lady of exceptional character and discretion, must possess patience and a gentle disposition. A position of unique importance for a discerning individual. Generous compensation assured. Inquire in person after 9 p.m. The Onyx Quill, 112 Rush Street. Ask for Mr. Sterling." The Onyx Quill. Evelyn had heard the name whispered among the more daring girls at the boarding house. It wasn't a business, not in the traditional sense. It was Speakeasy, one of the most exclusive and notorious in the city, a place where the city's elite mingled with its most dangerous shadows to sip illicit gin and dance away the nation's puritanical laws. The thought of stepping into such an establishment sent a tremor of her late mother's horrified disapproval through her. And yet, the words generous compensation were a siren's call she was too far adrift to resist. Survival had a way of silencing the ghosts of propriety. That evening, wearing her only decent dress, a simple navy blue wool that had seen better days, and with her heart hammering, a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Evelyn made her way to Rush Street. The address led her not to a grand entrance, but to a nondescript black door in a narrow alleyway, marked only by a small, stylized carving of a raven holding a quill. It smelled of damp brick and refuse. For a moment she nearly turned back, her courage failing her. But the image of the eviction notice, a white flag of her surrender, flashed in her mind. She raised a trembling hand and knocked 3 times, as a small sign instructed. A slot in the door slid open, revealing a pair of suspicious, world-weary eyes. "Yeah?" a gruff voice grunted. I'm here to see a Mr. Sterling," Evelyn managed, her own voice sounding thin and reedy. "About the advertisement." The eyes narrowed, assessing her from her neatly pinned brown hair to the scuffed tips of her shoes. There was a long pause, then the sound of a heavy bolt being drawn. The door swung inward, and Evelyn stepped from the cold, grimy alley into another world. The Onyx Quill was a cavern of decadent warmth and hushed opulence. The air was thick with the sweet scent of expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and something else, the electric thrum of secrets. Low, intimate tables were bathed in the soft glow of shaded lamps, illuminating the faces of men in sharp suits and women in shimmering, knee-length dresses, their bobbed hair gleaming like polished helmets. A jazz trio played on a small stage in the corner, a saxophone weeping a melody that was all beautiful, sophisticated melancholy. It was a world of polished wood, deep velvet and gleaming brass, a world she had only ever read about. She felt like a common sparrow that had accidentally flown into a cage of exotic, predatory birds. A hulking man in a tuxedo, the owner of the eyes from the door, grunted and gestured for her to follow. He led her away from the main room, past curtained alcoves where laughter and the clinking of glasses spilled out, and down a quiet, carpeted hallway. He stopped before a heavy oak door and knocked once. "She's here, boss," a low voice from within responded. "Send her in." The door opened, and Evelyn stepped into an office that was the very picture of masculine power. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room, its surface clear, save for a green glass banker's lamp, a heavy crystal ashtray, and a telephone. The walls were lined with leather-bound books that looked as if they were actually read, and a fire crackled softly in a stone fireplace. The man behind the desk did not immediately look up. He was swirling amber liquid, whiskey she presumed, in a heavy glass, his attention fixed on the small whirlpool he created. When he finally raised his eyes, they were the most arresting she had ever seen. They were a cool, clear gray, like a winter sky, and they held a profound, unshakable weariness that seemed at odds with the raw power he exuded. He was handsome in a severe, chiseled way, his dark hair slicked back from his forehead. The lines of his suits were impeccable, but there was nothing soft about him. He was a man built of sharp angles and hard resolve. "This was Arthur Sterling, miss," he prompted, his voice a low baritone that seemed to absorb the sound in the room. "Reed. Evelyn Reed." He gestured to the leather chair opposite the desk. "Please." Evelyn sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. He said nothing for a long moment, simply watching her. It wasn't a lecherous gaze. It was something far more unnerving. It was an appraisal, as if he were measuring the weight of her soul. "You come from a good family, Miss Reed," he stated, not asked. "University educated. Your father was a professor, I believe. Lost everything in the market downturn after the war." Evelyn's breath hitched. He had investigated her. The realization sent a fresh wave of fear through her. This was not a normal job interview. "How?" "It is my business to know things," he said, cutting her off smoothly. He took a slow sip of his whiskey. The advertisement was intentionally vague. "I am not looking for a secretary. I am not looking for a hostess for my club. I am looking for something different." He leaned forward, the lamplight casting his face in stark shadows. "I have a daughter, Miss Reed. Her name is Gloria. She is 6 years old. Her mother passed away a year ago." The words were delivered with a glacial control, but for a flicker of an instant, a deep and terrible pain clouded his gray eyes. "Since that day, my daughter has not spoken a single word." The confession hung in the air, heavy and shocking. Evelyn felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for this intimidating, powerful man. She has the best doctors, the finest tutors. They've done nothing. She lives in a world of silence. She needs more than a governess. A governess teaches lessons. A maid cleans rooms. I need someone to give her a reason to come back to the world. I need someone to be a mother to her. Evelyn stared at him, bewildered. "Mr. Sterling, I have no experience with children, and I certainly have no idea how to—" "You have a gentle nature," he interrupted again, his gaze unwavering. "It's in your file. More importantly, it's in your eyes. You're not hard. The world has been cruel to you, but it hasn't made you cruel. That is what she needs. Kindness, patience, a steady presence that has nothing to do with this world." He made a vague, dismissive gesture that encompassed the office, the club, the entire dark empire he commanded. He then laid out the proposition, his voice calm and dangerously reasonable. It was not a job offer, it was a contract. She would live in his home. She would want for nothing: clothes, food, security. He would deposit a sum of money into a bank account in her name every month, an amount that made her gasp inwardly, an amount that could buy 10 boarding houses. In return, her life would be devoted to Gloria. She would be a companion, a guardian, a source of warmth in a cold, silent house. She would, in public, if the need ever arose, carry the Sterling name. For all intents and purposes, she would become a part of his life, a fixture in his home, a beautiful, well-kept object in a gilded cage. "This is not a proposal of marriage, Miss Reed," he clarified, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "It is a business arrangement. My daughter's well-being in exchange for your financial salvation. You would be a mother in every way but biology, and you would be a wife in name only." Evelyn's mind reeled. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, transactional nature of his offer, was scandalous. It was a devil's bargain, trading her freedom and her name for a life of opulent servitude. Everything about her proper upbringing screamed for her to stand up, turn round, and walk out into the cold, honest poverty of the alley. But then she thought of Gloria, a 6-year-old girl trapped in a prison of silence by a grief too large for her to bear, a child living in a grand, empty mansion with a father who commanded the city's underworld, a man who was powerful enough to have anything he wanted, yet was helpless to mend the one thing that mattered most. Arthur Sterling watched her, his face an inscrutable mask. He wasn't pressuring her. He had laid his terms on the table and was now waiting, confident in the power of her desperation. Evelyn looked down at her hands, at the frayed cuffs of her old wool dress. She thought of the cold room, the eviction notice, the gnawing hunger. Then she looked up and met Arthur Sterling's gaze. In the depths of his winter-grey eyes, beneath the layers of power and control, she saw it again, a desperate, aching loneliness that mirrored her own. He wasn't just hiring a servant. He was searching for a soulmate, not for himself, but for his broken child, and perhaps, just perhaps, for himself as well. Taking a slow, steadying breath, she sealed her fate. "I accept, Mr. Sterling." The following morning, a sleek black Ford Model T, as silent and imposing as its owner, arrived to collect Evelyn from the boarding house. She had only a single battered suitcase to her name. As she descended the rickety steps for the last time, her former landlady watched from the doorway, her expression a mixture of suspicion and awe at the sight of the gleaming automobile and its stoic driver. Evelyn felt a strange, hollow victory. She was escaping her prison of poverty, only to be delivered to another, albeit one with gilded bars. Arthur Sterling's mansion was located on the Gold Coast, a world away from the grit and grime she was leaving behind. It was a formidable limestone fortress, its severe, elegant facade staring out at the grey, churning waters of Lake Michigan. It wasn't a home. It was a statement of power, a monument to a fortune built in shadows. As the heavy iron gates swung open, Evelyn felt as though she were being swallowed whole. Inside, the silence was the first thing she noticed. It was a profound, sepulchral quiet that absorbed all sound. Her footsteps, soft as they were, echoed on the black and white marble floor of the grand foyer. A chandelier, a galaxy of crystal teardrops, hung from the impossibly high ceiling, but its light seemed trapped, unable to penetrate the gloom that clung to the corners of the vast space. A stern-looking woman, in a crisp black dress and white apron, her grey hair pulled into a severe bun, greeted her at the door. "Miss Reed, I am Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. Mr. Sterling has instructed me to show you to your quarters." Her voice was starched, devoid of warmth. Mrs. Gable led her up a sweeping staircase, its dark wood banister polished to a mirror shine. The walls were lined with oil paintings of glowering ancestors who seemed to judge her with their painted eyes. Everything was exquisite, heavy, and old. The air smelled of beeswax and money, but there was no scent of life, no flowers, no baking bread, no laughter. It was a mausoleum, perfectly preserved and utterly lifeless. Her rooms were, in fact, a suite, a spacious bedroom decorated in muted shades of cream and rose, with a sitting room attached and a private bathroom tiled in pristine white marble. A walk-in closet stood open, and inside, to her astonishment, hung a wardrobe of new clothes, silk dresses in jewel tones, elegant day wear, shoes for every occasion, even delicate lingerie folded in scented paper-lined drawers. It was a princess's ransom, and it made her feel like a kept woman. The cost of this luxury was the life of the girl down the hall. After settling in, a task that took less than 5 minutes, given her meager belongings, Evelyn knew she could not delay the inevitable. She found Mrs. Gable and asked, her voice hushed, "Where might I find Gloria?" The housekeeper's expression softened by a fraction. "The young miss is in the playroom, ma'am, at the end of this hall." The playroom was another contradiction. It was filled with the finest toys imaginable, a German porcelain doll with startlingly lifelike eyes, a miniature wooden kitchen, shelves of beautifully illustrated storybooks. But the toys were all untouched, arranged with a museum-like precision. And in the center of the room, sitting on a small chair at a small table, was Gloria. She was a delicate child, with her father's dark, serious hair cut into a neat bob, and his startlingly pale gray eyes. Those eyes, however, were fixed on a single wooden block she held in her small hands, turning it over and over. She was a miniature specter haunting her own childhood. Evelyn's heart ached. She approached slowly, her shoes whispering on the thick Persian rug. She knelt so she was at the child's level. "Hello, Gloria," she said, her voice gentle. "My name is Evelyn. I've come to stay with you." The girl did not look up. There was no flicker of acknowledgement, no change in her expression. It was as if Evelyn were a ghost. Evelyn tried again. She picked up a brightly colored picture book from a shelf. "This looks like a wonderful story. It's about a bear who goes on an adventure. Would you like me to read it to you?" She opened the book, but Gloria remained utterly still, her entire world contained in the small, smooth block of wood in her hands. Evelyn sat there for what felt like an hour, speaking softly, telling the child about herself, about the world outside the grand, silent house. She received nothing in return. It was like whispering wishes into a well. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was a physical barrier, a wall of ice built around the little girl's heart, and Evelyn had no idea how to begin to meld it. Days bled into a week. Evelyn's life fell into a strange, suffocating routine. She would wake in her luxurious bed, dress in clothes she hadn't chosen, and eat meals served by silent staff at a dining table that could seat 20. Most of her time was spent in fruitless attempts to reach Gloria. She read stories to an empty gaze. She tried to initiate games with hands that would not play. She spoke into a void that offered no echo. And then there was Arthur. He was a phantom in his own home. He left before she awoke and returned late at night, long after Gloria was in bed. Sometimes she would hear his car on the gravel drive, the low murmur of his voice in the foyer as he spoke to one of his men. She caught only glimpses of his secret world. One evening, heading downstairs for a book, she saw him in his study, the door slightly ajar. He was speaking with 2 men whose faces seemed carved from granite. Their suits were expensive, but they couldn't hide the brutish set of their shoulders or the coldness in their eyes. Arthur's voice was different from the one he used with her. It was steel, hard, clipped, and lethal. "Malone is getting bold. Make an example of the runner. No witnesses. I want the message to be clear," he was saying. He must have sensed her presence. His head samped up, and his grey eyes locked with hers through the crack in the door. The lethal command vanished, instantly replaced by his usual guarded mask, but she had seen it. She had seen the gangster, the man who ordered violence as easily as he ordered whiskey. She froze for a heart-stopping second, then scurried back up the stairs, her heart pounding. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her beautiful room, looking out at the dark, restless lake. She was a prisoner in his silk dress. The house was a cage. Gloria was her silent warden, and Arthur Sterling was the dangerous, enigmatic zookeeper. She was terrified of him, of the world he represented, a world of threats whispered in smoke-filled rooms and violence carried out in dark alleys. Yet, as fear coiled in her stomach, another feeling stubbornly took root, a fierce, protective compassion for the little girl sleeping down the hall. Gloria wasn't just Arthur's daughter, she was a casualty, a victim of the same violent world that now kept Evelyn a captive. The contract she had made was no longer just about her own survival. She had accepted this life, this gilded cage, and she would be damned if she let the child remain lost in the shadows. Staring at the closed door to Gloria's room, a new resolve hardened within her. She had tried logic and reason, stories and games. They were the tools of a governess. But Arthur had not hired a governess. He had demanded a mother. And a mother, she realized, did not give up. A mother found a way. She just had to find the key to unlock the silent room in Gloria's heart. The days in the limestone fortress continued their silent, oppressive march. Evelyn felt as if the very walls were draining the life from her, replacing it with a polished, hollow resignation. She had tried everything she could think of with Gloria. She had built block towers that the child ignored, painted watercolors that went unseen, and read aloud from every book in the playroom until her voice was hoarse. Gloria remained a porcelain doll, beautiful, breakable, and utterly remote. One dreary afternoon, seeking refuge from the suffocating perfection of the main rooms, Evelyn found herself in a small, forgotten sunroom at the back of the house. It was the only space that seemed to have a history. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight slanting through the tall windows, and the furniture was covered in white cloths, like sleeping ghosts. In the corner, beneath a shroud, was the unmistakable shape of a Victrola gramophone, its large brass horn dull with neglect. On a whim, driven by a desperate need to fill the silence with something other than the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, she pulled off the sheet. Beside it was a cabinet of records. She slid one out at random. The label read, Clarence Beaufort's Blue Notes, Lakeshore Lament. Her fingers, clumsy from disusing any task that brought pleasure, carefully placed the heavy disc on the turntable and lowered the needle. The initial crackle and pop was a startling intrusion. Then, the music began. It wasn't the frenetic, dizzying jazz of the dance halls. This was something else entirely. A lone, weeping clarinet spiraled through the air, its notes dripping with a sweet, profound sorrow. A piano answered it, its chords like gentle footfalls in a lonely room. The music was heartbroken and beautiful, a perfect soundtrack for the House of Secrets. Lost in the melody, Evelyn didn't hear the soft footsteps behind her. She only knew she was no longer alone when she saw a small shadow fall across the floor. She turned, her heart catching in her throat. Gloria stood in the doorway. For the first time since Evelyn's arrival, the child's gaze was not fixed on her hands or on some invisible point in the middle distance. Her head was cocked slightly, her grey eyes wide and focused on the brass horn from which the sad, lovely music flowed. She took a hesitant step into the room, then another. She was drawn by an invisible thread of sound. Evelyn remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Gloria came to a stop beside the gramophone, her tiny hand reaching out, her fingers hovering just inches from the vibrating wood of the cabinet, as if feeling the music in the air. A flicker of something, curiosity, recognition, life, danced in the depths of her quiet eyes. As the clarinet soared to a particularly mournful peak, Gloria's small fingers began to tap, almost imperceptibly, against the fabric of her dress. 1, 2, 3, 4. A silent rhythm in a silent world. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost brought Evelyn to her knees, washed over her. It was not a victory, not yet, but it was a beginning. It was a crack in the ice. From the shadows of the hallway, Arthur Sterling watched, unseen. He had come home early, a rare occurrence, his mind preoccupied with turf walls and shipments of Canadian whiskey. He had been about to call for Mrs. Gable when he heard the music. It was one of Hazel's records. His first instinct was a flare of anger, a possessive rage that someone would dare disturb her things. But then he saw his daughter. He saw her step into the room, saw her eyes, for the first time in a year, truly seeing. He watched her tiny fingers tap out the beat to a song his late wife had loved, and the armor he had so carefully constructed around his heart fractured. In that moment, Evelyn Reed ceased to be a mere solution to his problem. She was a miracle worker. The following week, Arthur approached her in the library. "I'm hosting an event at the Onyx Quill on Saturday," he said, his tone as businesslike as ever, but his eyes held a new, unreadable depth. "It is important that my associates and competitors see that my house is in order. You will accompany me." As Mrs. Sterling, the blood drained from Evelyn's face. I don't think Mrs. Gable has been instructed to assist you with a dress. You will be ready at 8. It was not a request. He will be ready at 8. It was not a request. It was not a request. Saturday evening arrived like a death row sentence, speared like a captured night sky. The dress clung to her figure in a way that was both elegant and daring, a far cry from her sensible woolens. Her hair had been professionally styled into soft waves that framed her face, and a touch of makeup made her eyes seem larger, her lips fuller. She was playing a part, and the costume was terrifyingly convincing. The Onyx Quill was transformed. No longer a den of hushed secrets, it was a glittering showcase of Arthur's power. A champagne fountain bubbled near the entrance. A full jazz orchestra played on the stage, and the air buzzed with the conversations of the city's most influential and infamous figures. Politicians rubbed shoulders with men whose rap sheets were as long as their cigars. Taking Arthur's arm felt like taking hold of a live wire. As they descended the stairs into the main room, a hush fell over the crowd. Every eye was on them, on her. She could feel their gaze, scurious, appraising, predatory. They were all wondering who she was, this woman on the arm of the untouchable Arthur Sterling. To her own surprise, she did not falter. The years spent discussing literature and philosophy in her father's study had not entirely abandoned her. She found her footing, making polite, intelligent conversation with a silver-haired senator, and discussing a new gallery opening with a judge's wife. She smiled, she listened, she played the part of the graceful, intelligent hostess with a poise that felt borrowed. She was acutely aware of Arthur beside her, a silent, powerful presence. He rarely spoke, but she could feel his attention on her. She watched him watch her, and she saw a flicker of surprise, of grudging admiration, in his guarded eyes. He had hired a gentle companion for his daughter. He had not expected a woman who could hold her own in a room full of sharks. Later, as the evening wore on, the orchestra shifted its tempo. The wild, syncopated rhythms of the Charleston gave way to the slow, intimate sway of a foxtrot. The lights dimmed further. Arthur turned to her. His voice was low, for her ears only. "Dance with me, Evelyn." It was the first time he had used her given name. Before she could answer, his hand was on the small of her back, guiding her to the dance floor. The warmth of his touch burned through the thin silk of her dress. He pulled her closer than was strictly proper, his other hand enveloping hers. The scent of expensive whiskey and clean, masculine cologne filled her senses. They moved together in effortless silence, the rest of the room fading into a smoky, indistinct blur. They were an island of quiet intensity in a sea of noise. The wall of formality that had defined their every interaction crumbled with each step. She could feel the hard muscle of his chest against her arm, the steady beat of his heart. He looked down at her, his grey eyes searching her face in the dim light. "You've surprised me tonight," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "I am simply playing the part you assigned me, Mr. Sterling," she replied, her own voice breathless. "Arthur," he corrected her softly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And you were doing far more than playing a part." The music swelled, a mournful saxophone solo weaving a spell around them. He tightened his grip almost imperceptibly, drawing her even closer. For one heart-stopping, suspended moment, the pretense vanished completely. He was not her employer, and she was not his contractor. They were a man and a woman, bound by secrets and sorrow, swaying together in the half-light. The air between them crackled with a dangerous, unspoken connection that was far more scandalous than their business arrangement. The song ended, but for a long second they didn't move, lost in a silent understanding that had changed everything. The dance had altered the very atmosphere of the house. The silence, once merely oppressive, now seemed charged with unspoken words, heavy with the memory of that fleeting, dangerous intimacy. Arthur was still a phantom, his days consumed by his shadowy empire. But when their paths did cross in a hallway or over a late-night cup of tea, she took in the library. His gaze would linger on her for a moment too long. The cold, transactional nature of their arrangement had been irrevocably compromised, replaced by a fragile, terrifying tension. Evelyn's connection with Gloria, meanwhile, continued its slow, painstaking thaw. Music had become their language. Every afternoon, Evelyn would play the gramophone in the sunroom. Gloria would sit nearby, never speaking, but her small hands would keep her gentle. Perfect time, her body swaying almost imperceptibly to the melodies. They were small steps, but to Evelyn they felt like traversing miles. She was reaching the girl, she was sure of it, even if Gloria herself remained just beyond her grasp. Driven by a growing need to understand the family she was now inextricably part of, Evelyn found her curiosity leading her to the forbidden corners of the mansion. There was one wing she had been tacitly warned away from by Mrs. Gable's tight-lipped demeanor, a stretch of hallway on the second floor where the dust covers had not been removed. One rainy afternoon, when the house felt particularly tomb-like, she felt an irresistible pull toward it. She pushed open a door at the end of the hall. The air that greeted her was stale and thick with the scent of dried roses and disuse. This room was different from the rest of the house. It was undeniably feminine, decorated in shades of pale blue and ivory. A delicate vanity table still held silver-backed brushes and crystal perfume bottles. A silken robe was draped over a chaise lounge, as if its owner had just stepped away and might return at any moment. This was Hazel Sterling's bedroom. It had been preserved as a shrine, untouched for a year. Evelyn felt a pang of guilt, a sense of trespassing on sacred ground, yet she couldn't bring herself to leave. She needed to know the woman who had loved the fiercely guarded man and had been mother to the silent child. On the bedside table, nestled beside a stack of poetry books, was a small, leather-bound journal with the initials H.S. embossed in gold leaf. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It felt like a violation, yet the urge to understand, to piece together the puzzle of this broken family, was overwhelming. She sat on the edge of the dust-covered bed and opened it. The entries, written in an elegant, looping script, began with joy. Hazel wrote of her love for Arthur, a love that saw past the gangster to the fiercely protective man beneath. She wrote of her delight in their new home, of dances and parties, of the birth of Gloria, their perfect, luminous girl. But as Evelyn turned the pages, the tone began to darken. The year before Gloria's birth, the entries became fraught with anxiety. October 12th. Arthur is worried. Walter Malone is making moves, trying to encroach on the North Side territory. The Bull, they call him. The name fits. I see the violence in his eyes when he looks at Arthur. It chills me to the bone. November 3rd. There was a shooting at one of the warehouses. Arthur came home with a darkness in his eyes I have not seen before. He tells me not to worry, that he will handle it, but his promises feel like a thin shield against a coming storm. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She flipped forward, her fingers fumbling with the thin pages. The last entry was dated a week before the anniversary of Hazel's death, May 16th. Malone sent a threat, not to Arthur, but to me. A black rose left on the doorstep. A message. Arthur is incandescent with rage, a controlled fire that terrifies me more than any outburst. He says he will end this. He promises Gloria and I will be safe, but I fear the price of his world is one we will all have to pay. I look at my sweet, chattering gal, and my heart breaks with a love so fierce it feels like terror. Evelyn slammed the diary shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. An accident. Arthur had said his wife died in a car accident. It was a lie. This was no accident. This was a murder, an act of war in the brutal, unseen conflict that funded this opulent lifestyle. Gloria hadn't just lost her mother. Her mother had been stolen from her by the violence that was her father's trade. The child's silence was not just grief. It was the echo of a gunshot she may have been too young to understand, but whose shockwave had shattered her world. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Evelyn looked up, startled, to see Arthur standing in the doorway. His face was a thundercloud of fury, his grey eyes flashing like cold steel as they fixed on the diary in her hands. "What do you think you are doing?" His voice was a low, menacing growl she had never heard directed at her. It was the voice from the study, the voice that ordered men to their deaths. She scrambled to her feet, the diary clutched to her chest. I didn't mean any harm." He stalked into the room, his presence sucking all the air out of it. He snatched the diary from her grasp, his fingers bruising her wrist. For a terrifying second, she thought he might strike her. The raw violence simmering just beneath his controlled surface was palpable. "This is not your concern," he bit out, his jaw clenched. "You are here for my daughter, nothing else." Tears of fear and a sudden defiant anger welled in Evelyn's eyes. "She is your concern," she retorted, her voice shaking but clear. "Don't you see? She's not just grieving, she's terrified. Her mother didn't die in an accident, did she? She was killed, and that little girl is trapped in the silence of that secret." Her words struck him like a physical blow. The rage in his eyes faltered, collapsing inward, replaced by a raw, bottomless agony that was far more terrible to witness. He staggered back a step, leaning against the doorframe, as if his legs could no longer support him. The formidable Arthur Sterling, the king of Chicago's underworld, looked utterly broken. He ran a hand over his face, his composure shattering like glass. "Her car was forced off the road on its way back from a charity luncheon," he said, his voice ragged, the words torn from him. "Malone's men. It was a message for me. My wife, my Hazel, paid the price for my war." He looked at Evelyn, his soul stripped bare in his haunted gaze. Gloria was with her nanny that day, thank God, but she saw the aftermath. She saw the wreckage. She heard the whispers. She knows. A child always knows. His confession was a torrent of guilt and pain. "I built this empire to protect them, to give them everything, And instead, I brought the war to our doorstep. My world didn't protect them, it poisoned them. It took my wife, and it stole my daughter's voice. Every day I look at her, and I see my failure. I see the curse I put on her. The wall between them, built of contracts and secrets and fear, disintegrated into dust. In its place was a fragile bridge of shared vulnerability. Evelyn took a hesitant step toward him, her earlier fear forgotten, replaced by an overwhelming wave of empathy. She slowly reached out and laid a hand on his arm. His muscles were rigid with tension, but he didn't pull away. "It's not a curse, Arthur," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's a wound, and wounds can heal." He looked down at her small hand on his arm, then up at her face. In her eyes he didn't see judgment or pity. He saw strength. He saw understanding. He saw the first glimmer of hope he'd felt in a very long time. The space between them was no longer an empty void, but a shared sanctuary, a place where their two lonely, aching souls could finally meet. Do you believe love can conquer time and tragedy? Let me know in the comments. The confession in Hazel's room had forged a new, unspoken pact between them. Arthur's carefully maintained distance had evaporated, replaced by a raw, vulnerable trust. He began to talk to her, not as an employer issuing directives, but as a man confiding his fears. Late at night, in the quiet sanctuary of the library, he would speak of his struggles, of the constant threat posed by Walter Malone, and of his desperate, all-consuming desire to build a legitimate future, a fortress of normalcy around Gloria. Evelyn, in turn, was no longer just an employee. She was his confidant, a calm harbor in the perpetual storm of his life. This newfound closeness did not go unnoticed. Servants whispered, and more importantly, Arthur's enemies watched. Walter Malone, a man whose cruelty was matched only by his cunning, had been observing the Sterling household. He had noted the new woman, the way Arthur's car now sometimes came home before dark, the faint strains of music that occasionally drifted from the house on the lake. Malone wasn't just a gangster. He was a predator who understood that the strongest fortresses are brought down from within by exploiting the very things they are built to protect. He saw Evelyn and Gloria not as people, but as a new, perfectly positioned lever to break his rival. The first warning was subtle, a single, dead black rose left on the pristine marble steps of the front porch, the same chilling calling card he had once sent to Hazel. Arthur found it, and a cold, familiar dread washed over him. He said nothing to Evelyn, not wanting to frighten her, but the haunted look returned to his eyes, and the number of grim-faced men guarding the property seemed to double overnight. But Malone was patient. A few days later the second message arrived. Evelyn was in the garden with Gloria, trying to entice the child to touch the soft petals of a late-blooming chrysanthemum. A small, sharp crack echoed from the direction of the house, followed by the tinkle of falling glass. Evelyn's head snapped up. High on the second floor, a window in the unused guest wing had a small, neat hole in it, from which a spider web of cracks radiated. Instantly, two of Arthur's guards were at her side, their hands inside their jackets, their eyes scanning the trees beyond the iron fence. "Get inside, Miss Reed. Now." Shaking, Evelyn scooped Gloria into her arms. The child was rigid but silent, her small body trembling. As Evelyn hurried them inside, she saw what had cracked the window. Lying on the grass was a small stone, and tied around it was a grimy piece of paper. One of the guards picked it up gingerly. He read the note, and his face hardened. The violence of Arthur's world had breached the walls. It was no longer a distant threat discussed in hushed tones. It was a stone thrown through their window, a tangible promise of more to come. That night, Arthur summoned her to his study. The air was thick with the scent of whiskey and fear. The note lay on his desk. It was brutally simple. "A family is a beautiful thing, so easy to break." "He knows," Arthur said, his voice a low, ragged whisper. "He's not coming for me this time. He's coming for you, for Gloria's." The color drained from Evelyn's face. She looked at the immense, powerful man before her, and for the first time, she saw him as truly helpless. His money, his men, his entire empire, none of it could guarantee their safety against a man who dealt in terror. "I've made arrangements," he continued, his voice heavy with defeat. "A car will take you and Gloria to a private estate in Wisconsin tomorrow morning. It's remote, secure. Mrs. Gable will go with you. You will stay there until I have dealt with Malone." He was sending them away. The words should have brought relief, a promise of safety. Instead, a cold, sharp panic seized Evelyn's heart. He was pushing them out, severing the fragile connection they had built, sending her back to the role of a highly paid employee whose services were no longer required in person. He was trying to protect them, but it felt like an amputation. "No," she said, the word a quiet defiance in the tense room. Arthur looked up, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "What did you say?" "No," she repeated, her voice stronger now, fueled by a conviction that surprised even herself. "I will not go. I will not run, and I will not leave you to face this alone. And I will not," she added, her gaze fierce, "abandon Gloria." "Evelyn, you don't understand," he growled, his desperation making him harsh. "This isn't a game. This man is a monster. He will use you to destroy me. And what will happen to Gloria if she wakes up tomorrow and I am gone?" Evelyn shot back, taking a step closer to the desk, her hands clenched into fists. "Another person she loves vanished from her life without a word. Do you think that will heal her? Or do you think it will lock the door to her silence and throw away the key forever? Running away is what he wants. He wants to isolate you. He wants to break your family apart, just like the note said. We can't let him." He stared at her, utterly stunned. He had expected tears, fear, acquiescence. He had not expected this. He had not expected a warrior. Her refusal was not born of foolishness, but of a fierce, unyielding loyalty that mirrored his own. She was no longer a hired companion, or a woman playing a part. She was standing her ground, choosing to face the fire with them. She was choosing his family, their family. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a wave of overwhelming emotion. In her defiance, he saw a courage he hadn't seen in anyone. In her loyalty, he found a strength that had been waning within him. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping directly in front of her. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. His grey eyes, stripped of all their armor, were luminous with a feeling he had thought long dead. "You are the most stubborn, reckless, and bravest woman I have ever known," he whispered, his voice thick. "I'm just loyal," she breathed, her heart hammering against his thumbs. "No," he murmured, lowering his head until his forehead rested against hers. "It's more than that." The space between them collapsed, and he closed the final inch, his lips meeting hers. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion, but of profound, aching gratitude. It was a kiss that sealed their unspoken pact, a confession of everything that had been building in the silences between them. It was the taste of whiskey and fear, of loneliness and hope, of 2 broken souls finding their missing pieces in the most unlikely of places. When he finally pulled away, the world had shifted on its axis. The contract was meaningless. The pretense was gone. He was no longer just her employer, and she was no longer just Gloria's caretaker. Their love, confessed not in words, but in this single binding act, had been forged in the crucible of danger and devotion. They were in this together, for better or for worse, until the very end. The confession of their shared kiss did not bring peace. It brought the clarity of a battle line drawn. They were a unit now, a family forged in crisis, and the house on Lake Michigan became a command center. Arthur's men moved with a new, grim purpose. Every shadow was scrutinized, every car that passed on the street was noted. but they were defending a fortress against a ghost. Walter Malone was content to let the tension build, to let fear become the 13th resident in the Sterling mansion. The strike, when it came, was as swift and cruel as a serpent's bite. It happened on a deceptively calm afternoon. Evelyn was in the sunroom, the gramophone playing a gentle jazz waltz, while Gloria sat on the floor, finally engrossed in building a lopsided tower of blocks. For a brief, blissful moment, it felt normal. A mother and daughter in a quiet room filled with music. Mrs. Gable entered, her face pale, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. "Miss Evelyn," she said, her voice a strained whisper, "there's a delivery for you." At the front gate, a cold premonition slid down Evelyn's spine. Arthur had forbidden any unscheduled deliveries. "Who is it from?" He wouldn't say, "Ma'am." Just that, "It was for you." Evelyn glanced at Gloria, who remained happily oblivious in her world of blocks. "Stay with her, Mrs. Gable. Lock this door behind me, and do not open it for anyone but me or Arthur." The housekeeper nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Evelyn walked, not ran, to the front of the house. Through the beveled glass of the main door, she could see one of Arthur's men speaking to a messenger boy on a bicycle, a small, innocuous-looking package in his hand. But as the guard turned, his back to the gate, a black sedan with smoked-out windows screeched to a halt. Two men, their faces obscured by fedoras, pulled low, leapt out. It was over in seconds. A single muffled pop from a silenced pistol, and the guard crumpled to the ground. Before Evelyn could even scream, one of the men was working on the gate lock while the other ran around to the side of the house. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. They weren't coming for her. This was a diversion. She whirled around and sprinted back towards the sunroom, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Gloria. She was too late. The glass of the French doors leading from the sunroom to the garden lay shattered on the floor. Mrs. Gable was slumped unconscious in a chair. The gramophone needle was stuck, repeating the same 3 mournful notes over and over, and the block tower lay in a heap on the floor. Gloria was gone. In her place, on the small table where the child had been playing, was a single playing card, the King of Spades, and beneath it, a hastily scrawled note. "The old distillery. Midnight. Come alone, or the girl pays for your sins." When Arthur arrived, he moved through the house like a wraith of pure condensed fury. He saw the broken glass, the unconscious housekeeper, and the note, and something inside him broke. The controlled, calculating gangster vanished, leaving only a terrified father consumed by a primal rage. "Get the cars ready," he snarled at his right-hand man, Frank. "Every man we have. We're going to burn that distillery to the ground." "Boss, it's a trap," Frank pleaded. "He says to come alone. He has my daughter," Arthur roared, sweeping a priceless vase off a mantelpiece. It shattered on the marble floor. There are no rules anymore. As his men scrambled to arm themselves, Evelyn stood amidst the chaos, the note trembling in her hand. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror, but beneath the fear, a cold, sharp clarity began to emerge. Her father, the professor, had taught her to see patterns, to look for meaning beneath the surface of words. "The girl pays for your sins." It was a typical gangster threat, but something about the phrasing felt deliberate, a performance. And the King of Spades, why that card? Her eyes darted round the room, landing on the gramophone, its needle still skipping. Click, da-da-da. Click, da-da-da. A waltz, a dance, a rhythm of 3. Her mind raced back to the night of the party, to the whispers she'd overheard. The old distillery wasn't just one building. It was a complex of 3 warehouses on the south side, nicknamed the King, the Queen, and the Jack by the bootleggers who used them. It was a riddle. Malone wasn't just telling Arthur where, he was showing off, confident that Arthur's blind rage would make him miss the clue. He wouldn't be in the main warehouse, the King. That was the trap. "Arthur, wait," she cried, grabbing his arm as he was about to storm out the door. "There's no time, Evelyn. Listen to me," she insisted, her voice ringing with an authority that cut through his rage. "It's a riddle. The girl pays for your sins. It's a line from an old vaudeville play, The King's Ransom, and the King of Spades. He's not telling you to go to the king. He's telling you the name of the game. It's a ransom. He won't be in the main warehouse. That's where he'll have his men waiting for you." Arthur stared at her, his frantic mind slowly processing her words. Frank stepped forward. "The kid's right, Artie. The other 2 warehouses are connected by a rear tunnel. He'll be in the Jack watching the king, waiting for you to walk into the kill box." The gangster returned to Arthur's eyes, but this time it was cold, calculating. The plan shifted instantly. "Frank, you take half the men. You go in quiet, through the rear tunnel to the Jack. No shooting until I give the signal. The rest of you are with me. We're going to the front door of the king, and we're going to make a lot of noise." He turned to Evelyn, his eyes full of a desperate, terrible gratitude. "Stay here. Lock the doors." But as he turned to leave, Evelyn knew she couldn't. She couldn't sit and wait while the fate of their family was decided by bullets in the dark. The ensuing confrontation at the distillery was a chaotic symphony of violence. Arthur's car screeched to a halt in front of the main warehouse, drawing a hail of Tommy gun fire from the windows above, just as they'd planned. As Malone's men focused on the frontal assault, Frank's team slipped into the adjacent warehouse, unseen. Inside the Jack, Walter Malone watched the firefight from a grimy office window, a broad, triumphant smile on his face. Gloria was tied to his chair in the corner, silent tears streaming down her pale face. "You hear that, little girl?" Malone crowed. "That's the sound of your daddy dying." Suddenly, the office door burst open. Frank and his men stormed in. Malone's smile vanished, replaced by a snarl of disbelief as he reached for his gun, but he was too slow. The fight was brutal and short, but as Frank subdued Malone, one of Malone's men who had been hiding behind a stack of crates made a desperate move. He lunged for Gloria, pulling a knife and holding it to her throat. "Everybody drop 'em, or the kid gets it." The room froze. Frank and his men had their guns raised, but it was a stalemate. At that exact moment, a side door creaked open. Evelyn slipped in, her face pale but her eyes blazing with resolve. She had taken one of Arthur's cars and followed them, her heart in her throat. Seeing the knife at Gloria's throat, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy, empty liquor bottle from a nearby crate. "Hey!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the tension. The man with the knife turned his head toward the sound for a split second. It was the only distraction they needed. In that instant, a single gunshot echoed from the doorway. Arthur stood there, his face a mask of cold fury, his pistol smoking. The man holding Gloria crumpled to the floor. The chaotic waltz of gunfire, screaming, and shattering glass was over. Arthur rushed forward, cutting Gloria free and pulling her into his arms. The little girl clung to him, sobbing, her year of silence finally breaking in a torrent of terrified, relieved cries. Arthur held his daughter tight, his eyes finding Evelyn's across the dusty, blood-stained room. In the midst of the carnage, surrounded by the ruins of their enemy, they were a trinity, a family that had walked through fire and emerged, trembling but whole. The aftermath of the distillery raid was a swift and brutal changing of the guard in Chicago's underworld. Walter Malone's empire, built on fear and betrayal, crumbled into dust overnight. His lieutenants scattered like rats from a sinking ship, and his territories were silently absorbed. The news of his demise was a mere whisper in the city's back alleys, a cautionary tale that would be told for years. For Arthur Sterling, it was the closing of a bloody chapter he was determined to leave behind forever. He did not take them back to the limestone fortress. Instead, he drove the black Ford himself, navigating the deserted city streets as the first hints of gray began to soften the eastern sky. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, while Gloria, wrapped in Arthur's heavy coat, was curled asleep in her lap, her small hand clutching a fistful of Evelyn's dress, even in her dreams. The child's exhausted sobs had finally given way to a deep, peaceful slumber, the first, Evelyn suspected, she had known in over a year. Arthur parked the car along the edge of Lakeshore Drive. In the pre-dawn stillness, the Great Lake was a vast expanse of dark, polished steel, its surface mirroring the last of the fading stars. The city behind them was a silent silhouette, its grand ambitions and sordid secrets temporarily asleep. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore and the soft, even breathing of the child between them. The violence and terror of the night felt a world away, a nightmare from which they were slowly, tentatively waking. "I'm selling it," Arthur said finally, his voice low and raspy, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "The onyx quill, the warehouses, all of it. I've been setting it up for months, moving money into legitimate businesses. Construction, shipping. It's a slower way to make a fortune, but it's a clean one." Evelyn turned to look at him. In the pale, emerging light, the hard lines of his face seemed to have softened. The haunted look in his grey eyes, the constant, weary tension he carried in his shoulders, had begun to recede. He looked, for the first time, like a man who believed in the possibility of a future. "It's the only way," he continued, turning to meet her gaze. His eyes were full of a quiet, profound certainty. "I can't bring that world, our world, near her ever again. She deserves a life filled with sunlight, not shadows. You both do." He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the contract, the cold, transactional document that had brought her into his life. He held it for a moment, looking at the formal script and the stark signatures. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he tore it in half, and then in half again, the sound of the ripping paper, unnaturally loud in the quiet car. He let the pieces fall from his fingers onto the floor. "That was a business arrangement," he said softly, "and this is no longer a business." He reached across the space between them, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on Gloria's sleeping form. His touch was warm and steady. "Evelyn Reed," he began, his voice imbued with a sincerity that made her heart ache, "I came to you with a demand. I needed a mother for my daughter. I thought I could buy a solution to my problem, that I could purchase kindness and build a facade of a family to protect her." A single tear traced a path down Evelyn's cheek, but she did not look away. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I didn't need a servant, or a governess, or a woman playing a part. My daughter didn't need that. I didn't need that. We needed you. We needed an anchor in the storm. We needed a soulmate." He shifted in his seat, turning fully towards her, his plea laid bare in his eyes. "This isn't a proposal born from desperation, or offered in exchange for safety. This is a proposal from a man who is asking, begging, for you to share his life, not as Mrs. Sterling in name only, but as my wife, as my partner, as my love." The sun finally broke over the horizon, casting a brilliant, golden path across the water and filling the car with a clean, hopeful light. It illuminated the tear tracks on Evelyn's face and the raw hope on Arthur's. Just then, a small voice, clear as a bell, piped up from her lap. "Mama." Evelyn and Arthur both froze, looking down. Gloria was awake. Her wide grey eyes were no longer vacant or lost, but bright and clear. She was looking at Evelyn, a small, sleepy smile on her face. Then she turned her head, her gaze falling on Arthur. "Daddy?" The word, so simple, so long awaited, was a miracle. Arthur's composure finally broke. A single heavy tear rolled down his cheek as he let out a shuddering breath of pure, unadulterated joy. Evelyn's answer was not in words. She simply leaned across the sleeping child, her hand still held firmly in Arthur's, and sealed her promise with a kiss that tasted not of desperation or fear, but of a new dawn. Gloria, nestled safely between them, let out a small, happy laugh. The sound, bright and musical, filled the car, chasing away the last of the shadows. She reached out, her small hands finding one of each of theirs, and held on tight, her fingers linking them together. The gangster, the governess, and the silent child were gone. In their place, watching the sunrise over Lake Michigan, was a family, all healed and finally truly home. True love cannot be bought or contracted. It must be earned through loyalty, courage, and the willingness to be vulnerable. The greatest fortunes are not held in vaults, but in the connections we forge in our darkest hours, proving that even a heart, hardened by a violent world, can be healed by a love that is brave enough to stay. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more romances.